congregations while we were gone. This is the view basically out the window of one of the congregation, well, the congregation in Buena Vista, Colorado. I show you that to make you jealous and also share with you the first snow. When we pulled into town, there was no snow up on the peaks. And when we left town the night before, there had been some light rain and snow in the mountains. So you get to see what we saw as we left town the other day. When we met with a congregation there in Buena Vista, a congregation that my home congregation where I grew up supported it when it first started. It was nice to see they've added on to the building. They've done some great things. Congregation of around 60 or 70 people. There were 20 there on that Wednesday night. No children. Sad to see. But let me tell you, those 20 people could raise the roof in singing. They loved to sing, and that was the first Wednesday night of the month singing. And those 20 people drowned us out. They loved to sing. Then we visited my home congregation where I grew up in Colorado Springs, and there were a congregation of about 200 people, maybe 75 were there. And the elders are always concerned that people are staying away because of COVID, of course, and that's a legitimate reason to stay. But there are other people that are just staying away, which don't come to Sunday morning service, yet you see them at Walmart. It has become too convenient for some to stay home. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about in our Sunday evening presentation this coming week in our meeting. But I wanted to share that with you and let you know that there are other brethren going through some of the same challenges that we are going through. And it'll probably be like that for a time to come. Please turn over to Nehemiah Chapter 2. I did get to watch some of Todd's presentation last Wednesday night, getting things started. Thank you, Todd, for that. Chapter 1 is an interesting chapter. I'm not going to take the time to review it, but I would encourage you to please get into Nehemiah and Ezra, at least the first 6 chapters of Ezra, because as you'll see in a moment, they dovetail each other. You need to understand one to understand the other more completely. Because Ezra went back first, and then Nehemiah went back a little while later. Different purposes, but they kind of dovetail in time. And so we're going to be looking at Nehemiah Chapter 2 tonight. We're trying to allow as much conversation and input from you as we can, and we'll be reading through this as we enter into our study. Why do we study Old Testament books? Why do we spend time talking about Nehemiah? Here's a guy that lived roughly 500 years before Jesus, 2,500 years ago. Why does it matter what he said and what he did? Well, yeah, the Old Testament is our schoolmaster. It's the leader for us. And Romans 15:4, whatever was written in former times, was written for our instructions. And the second part of this verse is very important, that through the endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. We live in a crazy society. I think this is a very appropriate time to be studying Nehemiah because we have a government that is godless. We have a country that is turning godless. We have a world that is godless. And yet there were the same problem they had in that part of the world at that time, 2,500 years ago. Here was this religious group of people living in a godless society. Now, by that I mean they were living in a pagan society. The paganism today is pretty much atheism. So a lot of lessons can be taught to us as we look through our study of Nehemiah. So as we get into it here, let's make sure we understand where we are in time. If we were to put the Old Testament in true chronological order, Esther would come before Ezra. And I hope you know that, but if you don't, you do now. So tear it out. But Esther happens before the time of Ezra, and Ezra happens kind of in parallel and a little bit before the time of Nehemiah. And so you see from the chart here the things that are happening. I thought this was interesting to see, just as a reminder to us that Ezra has already gone back. There were 3 great returns, if you will. Zerubbabel went back at the decree, and then later on Ezra went back, and shortly after that Nehemiah went back. Nehemiah's return wasn't so much to take people with him, but rather take letters with him that he was going to use to encourage the people to help him get that wall rebuilt. So as we look at Nehemiah, I I don't know if you can see this too well on the screen, but I want you to notice some interesting things. The red or the orange line is the life of Daniel. Living, he probably passed away by this time. I know he passed away by this time. But notice that from the captivity in 606 until the decree of Cyrus, Daniel was alive. And read the end of Daniel, the beginning and the end of Daniel. It's really interesting that Daniel has lived through a lot of this. And he has prayed for, and he is looking forward to this return that will take place. He knows these 70 years are now up, and with the decree that comes from Cyrus, he is able to go back. Is it interesting to you that Cyrus's name appears in Scripture a long time before he was ever born? I think Todd spoke about that last week. God in his prophecy in Isaiah pointed out that a man named Cyrus is going to arise, and through him a decree is going to be made. I wonder if anybody ever went to Cyrus and showed him that in the Scripture. You were in the Bible before the Bible was, before you ever lived. But anyway, we move forward in time. Nehemiah has now had this conversation with the king, and we'll look at some of these later. And this conversation is interesting. The timing is interesting to me, because as you see on the calendar here, the month of Kislev, which is November, December, is when he got word from a brother. I don't know if that is a physical brother, some say that it is, or if it is just a brother in the Jewish religion, a fellow Israelite. But he gets the word. What was the word that he got? The walls are still down. The gates are still burned. And he uses this word derision in my translation. He says, we are a people living in derision. What does that mean? Yeah, we're disgraced. That's not what God's people are supposed to be infecting and impacting the world and not living in disgrace. And so the interesting thing is, it says that he brooded and he fasted and he was mourning. You know how long he mourned? For 4 months. Because if you see on the calendar, it's over in the month of Nisan when he appears before the king. He hears the word in Kislev, and it's Nisan, 4.5 months later. And he is moping, and he is sad, he is discouraged. If there is any book that helps us work on discouragement, it's this book too. Did he ever see a miracle? Nehemiah never saw a miracle, but what did he have tremendous quantity of? Faith and belief. And so we're going to see that come out in our study tonight as we look at Nehemiah. And let's start reading. I'm going to do my best. I've got the cough drop in place. I've got the jug of water over here, and I'll do my best to do some reading here. But if I don't, I'll call on some of you. We're going to read the first 8 verses and talk about them to start with. So now in the month of Nisan, remember this is 4 months later, in the 20th year of King Xerxes, when wine was before him, I took the wine up and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. And the king said to me, why is your face so sad, seeing that you're not sick? There is something of great sadness in your heart. Then I was very much afraid, and I said to the king, King, live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? And the king said to me, what is it that you're requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven. I want to pause there for a minute. He's standing before the king of not the known world, but a significant kingdom. And you don't talk to the king. This is you don't do anything. You're kind of, and on the best days, you're shaking a little bit. And the king says, why are you so sad? No, you're going to have a conversation with the king. Now, who's also present? The queen is also there. You're going to see that in a second. This must have been a celebratory time for the queen to also be sitting with the king. It wasn't just an average day in the court. There's something going on. It's a festive occasion, probably. The commentators are split on what was really going on. There's not enough information. But it is a challenge for Nehemiah. What did Nehemiah do? In the end of verse 4, what did he say? So I prayed to the Lord. Have you ever said a real quick prayer? The principal of schools and I had occasion to meet, and I said quick prayers. Have you ever said a quick prayer? it says, and so I prayed to the God of heaven. I think there was in his mind, he was in some kind of, God, here's an opportunity, please bless me with something to say that's right. He said, so I prayed to the Lord, verse 5, and so I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you might send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I might rebuild it. And the king said to me, and the queen said, guy sitting by his side, how long will you be gone, and when will you return? What does this say about the relationship or the trust that the king has in Nehemiah? It wasn't, go on, do it. It's, I'll let you go, but how long are you going to be away? What is his job? He's the cupbearer. He's between poison. He's between life and death and the king. And the king has tremendous confidence in him. And so he's worked himself to this position, a position of great trust. And the king is willing to help him and say, how long are you going to be gone? Did your folks ever say to you, Dad, I want to go do this or that? He says, how long are you going to be gone? Do you remember any of those days? I'm going on a date. What time are you coming back? Yeah. Maybe some of that here too. You know, by the way, how long he was gone? He's gone 12 years. I don't know if he told the king, I'm going to be gone for 12 years. That's a good question. The cupbearer in waiting. So he says, let's get down here to verse 6. And the king said to me, and the queen sitting by his side, how long will you be gone? And when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. So apparently they came up with some kind of an agreeable time. Was it 12 years? Who knows? And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let him send letters to be given to the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they may give me, that they will let me pass through until I get to Judea, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates and the fortresses and for the temple and for the wall of the city and for the house that I shall occupy. Notice he didn't leave himself out of this. He's going to build a house. And the king granted all that he asked, for that good hand of my God was upon me. That phrase indicates to most commentators that Nehemiah, is the one that's writing this, even though some say that Ezra was the primary one to write it. There are those that say, well, maybe Ezra wrote the second part. But anyway, in this second part here, you might have to flip that for me there. Hello. There you go. I don't know if you can read that very well or not. But there are several important points here. In the month of Nisan, I don't believe that this is the Automobile Corporation. And 4 months after he initially received the word, he's been mourning now for a quite period of time. And they're in Susa, and there are several capital cities. And it may well be speculated that when the king came back to Susa, this was a time when he saw Nehemiah again and saw that Nehemiah was sad. There's something special going on here that we're not told of, nor is it as important we know. But God has presented an opportunity for Nehemiah to do something great. And so he's noticed there's a sad face. You have good friends, and you can tell when they're sad. There was something about Nehemiah that was different. And people can tell that if they're close to you. Why should the king care about somebody, a servant? But there was apparently a very close relationship, which tells me Nehemiah has honed and worked this relationship. He's very trustworthy, he's very sound, he's reliable. And so when the king sees his most reliable, most dependent servant out there not looking good, he says, you're not sick, but you're sad. What's on your heart? Nehemiah said he prayed to the Lord, and then he made his request. So the king noticed there was a significant difference in him, so he prayed to the Lord. He asked permission to go to Jerusalem. The request was granted. Again, it's fascinating to me, a very important role, but the relationship is such that the king wants to help him. And that's just amazing to me. You may not see it as I do, But there's such a close trust relationship here that Nehemiah is allowed to go. He's proven his worth. So that was granted. And if you want to, and I wish you would, parallel the first 6 chapters of Ezra, what we're reading here. And even though your reading assignment for next week is chapter 3, go back and read through the first few chapters of Ezra and see a lot of the things that have gone on. The work at Jerusalem had been ordered to stop by a previous king. And so now, we're getting beyond this. They were trying to build things. Then they got discouraged, and the king, said, you can't build anymore. And why would you not want to rebuild Jerusalem? Why would a previous king not want to rebuild? What had Jerusalem been to other kings? A thorn in the flesh? A problem? You rebuild Jerusalem and you rebuild a nation. And so if you leave those former capital cities in ruin, you can still control the land. And we'll come to that in a minute as we discuss it further. But I love this statement. And the king granted to me what I asked, and the good hand of the Lord was upon me. Who did he give credit to? God. Even though he had a relationship with the king, he didn't say, I did this. My wonderful oratory skills before the king and bowing and handing him a glass of wine caused him to want me to. No, it was the good hand of the Lord. And we should always remember that it's the good hand of the Lord that grants us opportunities to proceed. And we need to pray that that will be the case. So let's move on now into verses 9 through 16 as we see what's going to happen when he gets there. It doesn't tell us anything about the trip, but the trip took a while. You go from the lower part of Mesopotamia, where Susa is probably at, you go up and around over the river and finally into the country. It takes a while to get there. Some say as much as 6 months of travel. So it's been a while now. He's been away 3 to 6 months, and he has with him a small army. This is what's fascinating. When Ezra goes back, remember when Ezra went back, did he take an army with him? The king didn't give him an army. What did he have? He prayed to God that God would bless him. And he put certain priests in charge of certain things, and you take care of this if we're attacked. But our buddy Nehemiah actually had an escort. Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. But when Sanballat the Hornite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly, and said, and someone said that it had come back, some had come back for the welfare of the people of Israel. So I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose at night, and I and a few men with me. And I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do in Jerusalem. There was no animal with me except the one on which I rode. I went out by night, out by the valley gate, to the dragon gate, to the dragon spring, to the dung gate, and I also inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down, and its gates, and all that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on around to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that I was riding to pass. I went up the valley at night and inspected the wall, and returned back and entered the valley gate, and so I returned. And the officials did not know what I was doing, or where I had gone, or what I was doing. And I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, or the officials, and the rest of them who were to do the work. So he has in his mind now an inspection tour. Now I have, those of you that have been in the military, how many times do you have inspection tours at night? Well, you're standing out there at 6 o'clock in the morning in your dress uniforms, being yelled at because there's a button unbuttoned or whatever, But here is our man Nehemiah doing an inspection tour at night. I wonder what he could see at night. Maybe there was a full moon, I don't know, but it would be hard to see at night. But why do you think he went out at night and did this by himself? Well, he hasn't told anybody yet. Incognito. Well, he is incognito. He doesn't want anybody to know he's doing this. He's got a few men with him. His enemies wouldn't see what he's up to, but he hasn't even told anybody else yet. You think he's still formulating a plan? He's trying to put together, how am I going to tell? What am I going to tell? When am I going to tell the people we have a project ahead of us? Where am I going to start? Exactly. But does it get all the way around? No, and we're going to see that in just a minute. Verse 17. Okay, we'll end right there. So the king sent Nehemiah with letters. What were the important reasons that he would send letters? Why did Nehemiah ask for letters? Yeah, it's kind of a pass, wasn't it? Yeah. We were listening to a program coming over about activities that led up to the development of the bomb in World War II. And there was one guy that was trying to get into a meeting. He was a lowly captain, and it was full of colonels and admirals and generals in there, and they wouldn't let him in. And he didn't have a pass. He didn't have just his own name, and they wouldn't let him in to this important meeting. He finally got in. But I remember this. Here's what if Nehemiah did not have any of those letters? What if he didn't have any permission or way to get through the forest and through the different places? He probably would not have made it. So he needed this kind of permission. What does that tell you about the thought process of Nehemiah? He's thought it through. He knows he's going to have some challenges unless he has something with the king's signature on it. So he makes his way and is successful. Opposition arose quickly. It appears immediately. When we put together plans to uplift the Lord in some way, we're working for the church in some way, Satan's going to throw opposition out there, and it didn't take any time at all. Not a minute before he gets there, there's somebody complaining that he's going to come and destroy the peace or whatever. So the opposition develops very quickly. Like the lights going out. Like the lights going out. We can overcome. We can just go to the other building and let sunshine in our souls. Nehemiah inspects at night. We talked about that a little bit and why he went out at night. You know, he wants to get a good idea. He's been told maybe as much as a year before that these walls still aren't built. The temple is it's built, but it's not anywhere near the beauty it was originally. And so he wants to do his best. He's got this mission in his heart to do what he can to rebuild these walls. The eastern side of the city, if you've ever looked at a map of Jerusalem, we'll do it in a minute, the eastern side is fairly sloped into the valley. And so he gets to a point where he cannot ride anymore. The walls have been destroyed so much downhill that he can't get around them. So he ends up probably going down the valley itself. And we'll look at that in just a moment. But few knew, really, I wonder really how many knew at the very beginning of what his mission was. A very special small group of people knew what he was up to. So we've got these guys, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. Now there's a lot of speculation as to who they were, why they are prominent figures here. More than likely they were semi-governors or in some way had some authority because they kept saying, we're going to tell the king on you. You know, they must have some connection back to authority, an authority chain somewhere. But if you can't read that, it's basically saying there that Sanballat the Hornite and Tobiah the Ammonite shouldn't exist. Why should they not exist? Because they were from peoples that the children of Israel should have destroyed. And yet they did not destroy. And what happens when you don't do what God asks you to do, tells you to do? You have trouble later. And so if these tribes and peoples had been truly destroyed by the Israelites as they came in and conquered the land, this wouldn't be a problem. But of course, there were other things that the Israelites didn't do that got them into the fix to start with. But they're probably of those tribes. And then Geshem the Arab probably is a governor or some kind of a prince or somebody in the southern part of what we would call Palestine today, down towards the lower portion. We don't really know for sure. They just were people that apparently had some moniker of authority. And the question is, since I can't read that, I have to turn around, I'm sorry. If Jerusalem is rebuilt, probably they will lose power and control. Because the point to where Jerusalem is on major trade routes. Trade routes coming from the south up to the north. And so it's reasonably close to these trade routes. If you rebuild Jerusalem, it becomes then a power point, and you're not able to get the trade and the taxes and gain from it themselves. So they tried several times to stop the work, if you are familiar with the book and as you continue to read. And the important thing is Nehemiah didn't give up. He didn't succumb to their threats. He had this plan in his heart. Now remember, he never had a miracle performed. He never had a small voice in the night tell him, go do this. He just had a mission in his heart, and he felt that God was blessing him. And if you make this, if you make this quick statement to the king, and he says, yes, go. He says, well, could I have some letters? Yeah, go. Well, could I maybe have a little army to go with me? Yeah, take them. Whatever. So he's got to feel that God is on his side and helping him through this difficult time. You can't see this very well, but let me point some things out to you here. He exits from the valley gate, and he goes around to the dung gate at the bottom, makes a turn, goes up to where it's believed the king's pool is, which is possibly the source of where Nehemiah built the water channel into the city. Remember the story of, you can still walk through that today. And he passes that and gets up to the water gate, but he can't go much beyond that because it's on a hill, and apparently, they're throwing the rocks over the hill. Now, Lena and I have walked over a few rocks over the past few days. Don't feel too sure-footed anymore. Now, these are big things. How are you going to get a horse over our pony or whatever he's riding, a small donkey? So there's no way he could do that. So I think he went on up the valley a little ways, maybe up by the east gate, maybe the inspection gate or whatever. And then he returned back around and went in through the valley gate. So it's really speculation exactly how far up he went. But the point is, he made a tour of that southern area by night. I don't know how long that would take you, but it took him sufficient time to know that he's got a project ahead of him. Well, let's get through the rest of this chapter and see what else is going to happen here. Then I said to them, you see the trouble that we are in now, how Jerusalem lies in ruins, with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem. Now that's got to be a monumental statement to these folks. Come, let us build this wall. Where's the construction battalion? Where are the cranes? Where are the people with building knowledge? They don't exist. Let's us build this thing. Like me saying to you, let's build this building. We don't have the trade, but we can do a fairly good job if we put our mind to it, and that's what happens. And I said to them, verse 18, I told them, the hand of the Lord was upon me and upon me for good, and also for all of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, this is the people, let us rise up and build. What words of comfort that must have been to Nehemiah. He spent a long time getting to this point. Come, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the work, for the good work. But when Sanballat the Hornite, Tobiah the Ammonite servant, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they jeered at us and despised us and said, what is this that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? Now, why would they say that? Because the previous king had shut this thing down. Of course, they weren't. Then I replied to them, this is to the people, the God of heaven will make us prosper. And he and his servants will and we are his servants will rise up and build. For what you have no portion or right in our claim in Jerusalem. So he tells these guys, we're going to do this. We're going to rise up, we're going to build it, and you don't get to be a part of it. Well, how's that going to make you feel? Not only now have they been challenged in their economic position, but now their pride has been challenged. So we're going to see a continual problem from these guys as we move into the actual building process itself. They must have had a small army and a group of people that would fight with them. And so as we get into chapters 3 and 4, we see that there's some protection provided there. Well, in our closing discussion, let's just talk about how Nehemiah got the people to say, hey, let's do this. The first thing he did is he laid out the problem. If you've ever worked in a company and you're in a management role and somebody says, hey, we have a problem. we're going to meet at 1 o'clock in such and such a conference room, and they come before you and say, you know, we have a marketing problem. We have not been able to market this product for a while. It's a great product, but people aren't hearing the news. How do we fix that? He's laying the problem out to the people. And then he says, his vision, come, let us build. We can do this. We can fix this. And he encouraged the people with his story. How do you think his story of how he finally got to this point in time would have been an encouragement to the people?
Previously, they'd been stopped.
They had been stopped.
Now this king said, go do it.
So we've got a little permission now. We've got. What else about his story would have been an encouragement to the people that are not going to get busy? They what? Okay. All right. So the people are going to take, they're going to take encouragement from the fact that, first of all, this guy's a bold man to even stand up and talk to the king. Wow. Remember the story of Esther, how she went in before the king, putting her life in her own hands. They understood that culture. And so for him to stand up and do that must have put him in kind of a celebrity status in some people's mind. And the people said, let us rise up and build. Now, he's trying to encourage them to do this, and finally they say to him, we're ready to go to work. Barbara?
Also, he told them about how God had helped him get this far
Mm-hmm.
through the king. And so
His,
that alone helped their faith and, get better.
they understood his story. He told it so well that they understood it, and it motivated them. That's right. Well, opposition rises. It arose at this time. It will continue to rise throughout the project. And what are some of the things that opposition will often do? Here, they make false claims. You're challenging the king. Well, what kind of opposition will we meet as we try, especially in our society today, to try to stand up for the Lord? As a Christian, by the way, if you stand up against a school board, you're somebody to be arrested and thrown in jail, you know. Well, as a Christian, as we go into the world that we are in, a very hedonistic world, a very sin-filled world, we're going to meet opposition as we try to build the walls that God has challenged us to build. And so there's going to be all kinds of claims laid against us. I will suspect that over the next few months, you're going to see lots of opposition to Christians, and I use that in quotes, trying to do good things and getting a lot of opposition thrown at them because of Satan and his dominance in society today. You just watch. Now if we meet this kind of challenge, we need to do what he did. Just put our faith in the Lord. We're not going to see a miracle. We're not going to see something magic happen, but we know we're on the right side. And so we got to do that. I think that's one of the great lessons we get out of this is Nehemiah met a great deal of opposition, yet he did not step back. And so Nehemiah took hold of the leadership. He stood up against their opposition, and he did as much as he could to encourage the people to rise up and build. So that brings us to the end of chapter 2. Please read chapter 3. So Stacy's job next week. You're doing it, Stacy. You're doing it next week, right? Yeah. I can't tell if that's you in the mask or it's just a. Yeah. But by the way, in Colorado, we saw maybe 5 people wearing masks. It's just not anything there. So we didn't stop by to see my mom because we didn't know if we might have a bug upon us. So we'll go up and see her soon. But anyway, there are some questions I think that are worthy of discussion in the last few minutes. What does the initial exchange between the king and Nehemiah tell us about the relationship and the king's confidence? Anything you remember from that sticks out to you? I find it fascinating that it happened. The respect word, yeah. What does that tell us? As we're trying to be a light in the world and the light and salt of the world, gaining respect is important. Yeah. it's a dicey situation once in a while, isn't it? But he developed, apparently, an incredible amount of trust and confidence so that the king noticed there's something wrong with my cupbearer. Well, maybe our friends hopefully would see if we are ever downcast, there's something on our hearts that we need to share with them. Is there anything significant about the queen's presence? You read the commentaries and they go off in all kinds of directions on it. The scripture doesn't say, so we don't really know, but the king and the queen usually didn't sit together unless it's a prominent situation. And it says, and wine was brought before the king. And usually a king sitting on the throne isn't drinking wine, usually doing that at a meal somewhere. And so maybe this was a toast of some kind. I don't know. Some speculate that this was some kind of a high-level meeting, some kind of a deal where the queen's presence was necessary. I think it shows the significance of the occasion.
What celebration did they have in the year of Nice?
Well, the Jews had a lot of stuff going on in this time. I know of nothing in the Chaldean calendar that might say.
Back to the first verse.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, but there's something was special about this situation. How long had Nehemiah been brooding? I use that word, that's not from scripture, but how long had he been fasting and brooding over Jerusalem? And now it's all upside down on me. And what did he do when he asked the king when the king asked about his sadness? Well, of course, how do I answer the king regarding a personal problem? You're sitting in the presence of a dignitary, and your job is to simply hand him a pad of paper or translate something for you, and he notices or she notices there's something wrong and asks you the question. Are you really prepared to answer? I wouldn't be. And what he says, I said a quick prayer. At least we can do that. But we should be ready at all times to give an answer for the hope that's within us. Maybe that was something that maybe Nehemiah had been practicing. If the king ever asks me, I'll be ready with an answer. I don't know. But he did take advantage of the situation. Why did Nehemiah inspect the walls by night? Well, we talked about that. Probably to keep it secret. He's doing this methodically. Remember in the life of Jesus, he was going into areas and doing things, but he would heal someone and he'd say, now don't tell anybody. And then finally the Sermon on the Mount happens and he begins more of a public time. Maybe something like that. The time wasn't right for Nehemiah to spell out what's going on. He wanted to understand better the condition of the city. Well, what did Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, what do they represent in the Christian walk that we try to live? Besides having names I can't pronounce. Like Darius, is it Darius or Darius? You see them both. Artaxerxes or Xerxes, Ahasuerus. I can't pronounce all these words.
Well, they were against, evidently, the rights of the people.
They were going to lose. Yeah, they had a money pot.
Like a denomination. They weren't following.
They had a power, they had the power, they had the ability to stay in power. And so rebuilding, the temple gave them a lot of grief. And now later on, these three are in there and giving grief to these people trying to rebuild this wall. So how did Nehemiah inspire the Jews to get to work? What are some of the things he did?
Told him his story with the king.
He told him his story.
The king had opened the door for him to come back and supplied him with supplies of the forest.
And even before that, he shared with them his vision. Why is this wall not built? You're letting these guys out here, these heathens, keeping you from doing God's work. God's been with me. Here's my story. And it inspired them. In 52 days, they built the thing to half the height. Maybe they got busy, didn't they?
Towards the end of the book, we see where he's not only bold, but he gets the business. He tells them, you're going to come in on Sabbath. I'm going to reach out.
Yeah.
He says he's going to get busy.
Well,
He tears the didn't hold back whatsoever.
He was a man of action for sure. That's where it's important to get Nehemiah and Ezra kind of linked together. Yeah. He wasn't a passive person. Well, anyway, thank you for your time. We'll bring it to a close. Read chapter 3 for next week and the first few chapters of Ezra, and it will make so much more sense to you because a lot of things are happening. We teach these stories in Bible classes as a single isolated little story, when in fact they're connected to so many other things. And you become better connected when you read all of the parallel material. We'll have our song here.